Okay, hi everyone. I think we can get started. Welcome. My name is Janelle Brown. I am a programmer for Los Angeles Film Forum, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the curator and artist conversation for Can You Sense It between Jaqui Brown, Tamika Galanis, and Bridget Oetti. So I'll just kind of be do some quick emceeing at the front, and then I'm gonna let everyone else take Jaqui take it away with this conversation in a bit. But just a little bit about Film Forum. Film Forum is Los Angeles's longest running media arts organization devoted to the exhibition of non-theatrical, experimental, and nonfiction work. The organization's been around since 1975. And okay, so today, hopefully folks have been able to tune in. We've had 2 successive weeks of film and video work from the artists you're gonna hear from later. But just a little bit in terms of housekeeping, after this conversation, you'll be able to access them until the 12th. And I'll circle back at the end of the program. I just need to confirm that with Adam Hyman, our director. But you'll be able to, if you haven't had a chance to watch them, you'll be able to do that after this conversation. And our next, just a little bit about our next program. And for those who are interested, programmed by Leroy K.Y. Kong. We have What We Imagine in Its Absence, and that'll be work from Vika Kirkenbauer and Carolyn Key. So again, we'll be following this model of a week first of Vika's work, then a week of Carolyn's work, and then a curator conversation with artists, just as you're about to experience right now. And so just a quick bit of housekeeping. You all are watching this via the Eventive platform, and so you'll have access to a chat. And we encourage you to be as engaged as you want to be. And you can put all your questions in the Eventive chat, and then I'll queue them up for Jaqui. And in as much as people are up for it, we'd really love to hear your questions as they come to you. And then Jaqui will integrate it in the conversation. So hopefully we don't really fall into the traditional just audience questions at the end. So please, any questions, we will, they'll be weaved into the conversation as it makes sense throughout the conversation. And then I think there's some people that are also logged on to the Zoom. And if you do have a question and you're up for joining the webinar and turning your mic on, you can just put that in the chat, and we can also enable that as well. So we kind of have it coming from both ways to make it as dynamic as possible. All right, and so I'm gonna read short versions of people's bios because we have very esteemed, active, dope people here today. Okay, so really quickly, Tamika Galanis is a documentarian and multimedia visual artist. A Bahamian native, Galanis's work examines the complexities of living in a place surrounded in tourism's ideal during the age of climate concerns. And just again, everyone's bios are in the program notes, which are accessible via the chat. So we're giving you cliff notes right now. And then Bridget Oetti is an artist and curator from Ngati Ranguni and Nagai Tarangi in Toranga Moana Atoria. Her lens-based practice explores indigenous landscape perspectives and the intricacy of contemporary Maori realities. And our guest curator for today, Jaqui Brown, is a second-generation Atlanta-based cultural organizer and film curator who dedicates her time to creating the physical, figurative, and fugitive spaces Black people need to spark collective healing. So that's it for me. Again, please Send in your questions as they come. Looking forward to a great conversation. And with that, I'll let Jaqui take it away.
Thank you, Janelle, and thank you, Adam. And of course, thank you to Tamika and Bridget for being here. We're all in very different time zones, so I'm grateful that we could make this work. So I just want to start with a really simple question. Well, simple for me, may be difficult to answer for you, but how did you know that you wanted to work in film and video art? And how did you get to the place where you had the skills where you could craft the work that you wanted to? Either of you can start.
Bridget, you can go ahead.
Okay, I'd just like to start off by acknowledging Jaqui and thanking her for putting this program together. It's been really amazing being able to watch Tamika's work and being introduced to it, and I feel really privileged to be part of this conversation all the way from over here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and I'd like to thank the Los Angeles Film Forum, Janelle and Adam for liaising it as well. So thank you everyone for having me. I think my interest in moving image and video work is sparked by having control over the lens and being able to be a Māori woman, an Indigenous woman, and being able to have the power that is normally not in my hands, and to show my point of view and my perspective of the world. And alongside that is working with people and not treating them as subjects or treating the land just as a subject, but being in conversation and in dialogue. And often I work with my family, and so it's been really nice knowing Jaqui and Janelle, that your sisters. That makes me feel really safe and happy to be working with other people that work with family. Yeah, so I think it's that being able to show my perspective to the world that's incredibly important. I'll hand it over to you, Tamika.
I'd like to second those sentiments. Bridget, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure getting to know your work. With such a distance between us, and to notice the through lines that emerge in the work. Why moving image? Why film? I work in several different mediums, but I'd have to say moving image and film are my favorite. And I think I'd have to second that sentiment also. Like, I do a lot of my work is derived from themes in historical archives and encountering historical archives, and not just the work that's in the archives, right? But also like the supporting documentation around it and the way the work is described and documented. And it's so much of the Bahamas has been documented through an outsider colonial lens that it's very important for me to be able to tell the story of the Bahamian experience from an insider's point of view. And for me, I'm not a painter. Film seems to be the best medium for me to document in when what I think of, what I consider my way is in a non-linear way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that non-linear way of thinking is definitely in line with a lot of our kind of Māori and Indigenous ways of thinking, and that it's circular and holistic, and this different threads of a narrative, and definitely like metaphorical.
Yes.
within a lens-based practice, it really lends itself to portraying that in a way that I find really exciting. And also, I'm not a painter either. I can't draw.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about that, because for me, that is something that is, for me, your works are related in that way, but also your works are related in the feel to me. Like, it feels like both your works speak directly to me as an audience member. Sometimes there are people actually speaking right directly to you. Bridget in the stories that are featured in Irihanga and Otakaro, and Tamika in A Thousand Points of Light. The Dominican Prime Minister feels like he is speaking directly to me, even though he's clearly speaking to a UN General Assembly. So I'm curious about how, once you knew that you would work in lens-based art, how did you go about gathering the skills that you need to do something like capture or convey circular, more holistic, the narratives, the stories, the people, the communities, the whatever you were trying to capture and convey? How did you go about gathering the skills and developing the approach to be able to do that?
You know, Jackie, I in every bit of work that I do, I'm working out a question that I have, something that I'm personally trying to understand or wrap my head around or make some sort of reconciliation with. Everything else is just tinkering, right? Like, so for a long time, I played around with various different cameras, and then film, right? And so I kind of came to the medium backwards, just as, and we can consider that some kind of non-linear introduction to this medium also, right? But I'm always trying to find a way to reconcile what I think is an issue with what I think can be some sort of solution. Not that I can save anything or turn the needle on climate change or anything, right? But what I can do is I can create a counter narrative to what would be left behind if we don't begin making some other sort of archive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that touching on that point of the archive is incredibly important, and in a way, my work, I try to make it from my center, and without having to kind of, even though it's often informed, and you know, the research, the archives that we have to go through is usually being developed or collected by colonial institutions and people that aren't us, to then know all that and then create work from our own center without kind of having to respond or react, but kind of if we center it and then move forward, and in turn creating our own archive and our own, I guess, building on all the narratives that already exist for us as well. Yeah, I'm not sure if that makes sense.
Did you both know that when you started your practices, you would be focusing on the Bahamas for you, Tamika, and Bahamian people, and Bridget for you, Maori people, folklore, landscape? Did you know that at the beginning?
No. I'd say for me, it was a sort of unfolding. It was an unfolding of a number of events that were happening at the same time. What I felt was a mismanagement of culture, and encountering the archive, and being here and being frustrated about socio-political, economic issues, and going to grad school at the same time, and they somehow all folded one into another. And I then had a very straight path, a very clear definition of what it was that I wanted to do.
Mm.
Yeah, I think part of my focus on the landscape and Māori narratives is that I get to do fun things outside. So I really like hiking and spending time outside, and that was a way to kind of join them together. But also here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there's a lot of places, national parks that are uninhabited now because Māori were either removed from those places or the land was essentially confiscated and created into something else. And so there's a lot of places here that have Māori names and narratives that have been overlaid with colonial names and stories. And so it's about kind of researching and uncovering those and giving it a bit of light that, you know, this country we live in is inherently Māori, whether people say it's, you know, an uninhabited wilderness or not. Those places we did go to and we did name and give them narratives, and we have a relationship with them. So I think it, my focus on making video work is a way for me to spend more time there, which is what I enjoy. Yeah.
I would have to say that now that you say that, Bridget, that is a lot of what informs my work in the Family Islands with the cameras, that I can spend time between people. I can spend time in the bush if I want to. I can spend time with animals if I want to. And I don't only have to write about it. And because I don't only have to write about it, you get to experience as close to what my experience is as when I'm having it.
Yeah. And having that relationship within the with the people and the places.
Yes.
That's building our archive and making our connections with each other stronger, supporting each other.
Yeah.
There's a question I'd like to bring in here from Janelle. Well, she's got two, but the first one is, she says, I'd love to hear about the mode of address in both of your works, specifically the titles. They seem to directly address people. To me, this feels like a way to undo ethnographic histories, to implicate the audience and demand active spectatorship. So yeah, could you speak about how you, if you conceive of an audience at all, and yeah, I hope the question is clear.
Yeah, I think most of the time when I think of an audience, I think of my family and whether they would appreciate it or get it or find it funny. And it's inherently a Māori audience that I am making work for. And yeah, that's who I work with and for. And, you know, having kind of other access points for a broader audience is really important. But again, making from that my own centre for my community, that's first and foremost. And that's not to say that it's not accessible to others. That's just the main goal. But sometimes with the titles, I just kind of like to have a bit of fun. And with some of them, I guess it is playing on maybe within kind of like either film or photography, there are those words like capture or take a photo or like a shot. And so they kind of can in a way seem quite aggressive or violent terms, and so kind of using those and acknowledging it. And then, you know, there's, I think one of the works, excuse me, you're in my shot. Like, it's kind of imagining when there's ethnographic kind of photographers or people that documented us set up a shot, and that's contrived, and it's you know, they definitely placed people in certain positions and put different clothes on people, and it was set up. So it's kind of like saying this is, it's although it's portrayed in a way that is supposedly a documentation, it's very much their perspective of what they wanted to portray us as. Yeah.
If I can just say really quickly, you know, that feels so directly, not feels, it is so directly related to Tamika returning the gaze, which I have a habit of not doing Caribbean accents because I fear I'll sound like Miss Cleo. So if you could say the second part of the title, please.
Yeah, I can give you what you're looking for. Yeah, that I agree with you, Jackie, and I was thinking about that as Bridget was speaking. I actually had to sit here and try and rack my brain. What are the titles to these films? But it came to me that exactly what Bridget is talking about in that particular film. It was an overt speaking back to that film crew for the original, for the archival films in that film. And for what Jackie was saying was the full title of that film is Returning the Gaze. I can give you what you're looking for. I make my work for a Bahamian audience. Obviously, I want a wider audience to view it, but you know, going back to me saying that all of my work is me trying to resolve an issue that I have, or to reconcile myself with something that's happening in that particular film. Those archival films come from the Thomas Edison paper film collection at the Library of Congress. So they're dated like 1901, right? And the way even the films are documented, it seems a bit harmful to the subjects that are in the film, besides even the gaze, right? And we look at those films and the gaze is harmful. And so what I wanted to do was I pulled the films that were filmed in the Caribbean. And I wanted those people to have a different sort of response to what was happening with somebody else who held the power and the resource to collect their image. I wanted those people to be able to counter that gaze, whether it was through sound or, well, particularly in this film, there's no sound, right? So it needed to be through landscape. You needed to see that we were squarely in the Caribbean, and by body language and gesture, like with the woman who pulls out the cutlass at the clothing line, right? Where she's hanging out laundry. Where are you? Where you come from? What you doing? Why you looking at me? In the body language, right? And any Bahamian would understand what that means without needing any sound. So I don't think it's on purpose. I think that's just who I am. That's the way that these films sort of pan out in Bahamianese.
I think that's, you know, to the extent, I don't know how this will be received, and I am thinking about this as I say it, but that's why I think that's something that only, that people that are not in America and who do not live in America, I feel like that can only be achieved by people who are not coming from an American based world, because we're programmed to be in conversation with like a more, to be in conversation with it, and to be in conversation, you have to make things transparent and accessible to. And so we explain things and we give context, even if we're making this not for those institutions and not for colonizing places and things. So I've been trying, you know, since I first spoke with both of you all, I've been trying to put to words exactly what you're talking about, how you're not explaining, you both drop us in to places, like literally just drop us in. But I feel like I'm there, I feel like I can look around, I feel like there's some sort of guiding mechanism or principle, and I can't communicate it, but I feel it, I sense it, and I can move with it and around. And I feel like that's a very, not I feel like, I know that that's a feat that even if I can't put into words why or what it is that gives me that sense, I know that it's a feat that's worth like platforming, holding up, and just like continuing to look at, you know, over and over and over. Yeah, no question there, just a statement. And so Janelle's other question was, can you talk about how you hold yourselves accountable in your work, accountable to your respective communities, as artists and culture arts workers? Even with your best intentions, sometimes I get anxious that I'm being extractive. Can you both talk about any sorts of internal rubric you set for yourself?
Yeah, I'll speak specifically about my time in Cat Island. My first trip to Cat Island was, I think, at the end of 2018. And when I went in, I knew that I would be embedding myself in the community, right? And not just as a documentarian. I marked out a lot of time to do personal stuff in the community. Like by the time I was leaving there at the end of my first 3 months, I was making baked macaroni and cheese for the church anniversary. You know, I'm out with the community collecting bush medicine and firewood, and I'm spending time with my neighbor's baby and the dog, and just making sure that I am learning as much from them and in a position to learn as much as I can and be of service to the community rather than just be somebody who's always asking questions and pointing cameras, you know?
Yeah, it's that accountability is essential for I think working with people and also with landscapes. And sometimes in a way I feel that even if I've made a work, I kind of tell myself it's not finished because now I've formed a relationship that I have to keep going back.
Yes.
And I'm always like, oh, I'll be back. I'll come back. And then like eventually I do go back, but it takes me a while. But it's still always something that I could return to and maybe tweak that work or make another a sequel to it. Or yeah, there's a continuation that initially makes, there's a bit of trepidation because I know once that relationship is developed, I have a huge obligation to keep it going. And that's important, but you know, it's can grow and there's lots of room for that. Yeah, it is difficult though. Like at the moment I'm living in a city that so I'm not from this area, and making genuine connections and relationships with people. It takes a lot of time, and you want to. Sometimes people are fine and they're like, oh yeah, just go do it, and then other times they can be question you a lot more, which I think is important, and I think we need to give people that agency to question what we're doing, and we have to be able to answer, I guess, with integrity, and be able to grow as well in those. But then I think coming back to something you were saying before, Tamika, there was like with maybe that archival kind of footage, there's photography was introduced to us in the late 1800s, and a lot of it were unidentified or tourism or postcard photos of us, and some of them have become identified lately, and we've we have ownership over those photos of our ancestors, and so there's this agency within that of adopting and taking this new medium of photography and having it be part of our everyday kind of cultural experiences. And now, photographs of ourselves and our ancestors are incredibly important to kind of daily cultural practices. And so I'm just kind of amazed that there's, something that is harmful and did and does represent us in a, overly sexualized or harmful way, that we still have that agency to use it to our kind of best advantage. I don't know, I'm not quite saying it right, but yeah.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's all decolonial work, right? It's a decolonization of the practice. It was very important for me because of the nature of how these historical archives have been collected, that I not be that person, that I not be the person who goes in, extracts what I need and leave. And it's been several years now since I've left, and I don't take those relationships for granted. My phone rings several times a week from Cat Island to say, hey, when you coming back?
Yeah.
What's next? what project are we working on next?
Yeah.
And I don't take that for granted at all, because that has not historically been the way this kind of work has been done.
So there in your practices, we're seeing both of you doing the circular and holistic approach to actually making the work, not just in what you're trying to capture and convey through the work. And so then what I'm curious about then also, Tamika, you spoke about this in Returning the Gaze, but thinking of, speaking of going back to retrieve things, repurpose them, re-enliven them, I'm curious how each of you select the actual images for the works, and how you decide what audio to pair them with, because in every work except for the except for your series, the Camera Obscura series, Bridget, I think the audio and images are not the same. So how do you go about selecting? So we have this, big broad view of your practice, but how do you go about selecting the actual images and what to pair them with?
I think it depends on the project, and so each project I guess, focuses on a certain narrative, and it's about how to best portray that narrative. And I think in a way I quite like the disconnect between the image and the audio. And I think, you know, especially in a gallery space, audio can fill a space really nicely, and it can kind of carry you in if you hear it from another space, and help kind of carry the story through, where I quite like the visual aspect to be maybe a bit more subtle, but yeah. And also, I think the audio too is a chance for me to work with people. And so for, say, Irihanga, that was my grandmother reading a story, and she was a teacher for like, I don't know, she didn't stop till she was like 80, and we had to kind of be like, oh man, you have to stop teaching now, you know. So she has a really good reading voice, and after she had heard the first recording, she was like, oh no, I want to do that again, that's not my best. And we had to do it like quite a few times. So yeah, it's a way for me to work with people that I enjoy. And I guess the footage itself, I like to make the camera not kind of in people's faces, or there's a Māori filmmaker, and he talked about the camera being a friend that you know, take to your family, and you're responsible for that friend, and that friend could be really inappropriate, and you're going to be embarrassed by that friend, or that could be a really cool friend that you're going to introduce your family to. And so I like the idea that, you know, you have a lot of, you're holding a lot of trust when you take your camera to certain places. And yeah, I also just kind of like setting it up and seeing what captures. So I don't really, I'm not telling people what to do beforehand, or kind of have these, I just have general ideas in my head, and then we record and see what happens. Yeah.
I think when I am choosing audio and film, I just try to marry the things together that make me feel the most that they're in service to the storytelling, right? Like, so for instance, in 1,000 Points of Light, that video work was actually an installation in my solo show, One Hurricane Season, in 2018. And so that piece is very personal, because the video in that work is my family film archive, which had been digitized a few years ago. But I use that because during the hurricane season of 2017 took the Caribbean through it. Like, we really, really got beat down. But at the same time, we were having a bit of a storm in my house. My grandmother is in her 80s, and she was transitioning to where she was losing her speech and her mobility. And I was thinking about a way to reconcile, for me, this storm that was going on inside my house and that was going on outside. Like, we woke up, we had been hit with a series of storms, right? I think Irma and Maria were that year, which is why the Roosevelt Scarrett's speech is the voiceover in to that video. But I thought about the satellite images after those storms, and everything that was green the day before, we woke up and it was brown, right? And I imagined that my grandmother was having that same experience in her body and in her memories. I watched her decline from one day being able to dress herself to have to help her put her undergarments on and comb her hair for her. And it seemed like it was a series of months, but just like the hurricane season is a series of months, it's like an overnight happening, right? And so I imagined that film it's much like what was going through her mind with her memories. And because it's filmed, it's then digitized and it's aged, it glitches a lot. And I imagine that that is what being in a body, waking up in a body that's different and can't recall what it can from the day before, is much like waking up in a place that's been storm ridden, that does not look familiar anymore. The circumstances are not familiar anymore, and it's happened overnight. So that's why I married, in particular for that work, those films with that audio.
What about when the lionfish came? Why did you, especially with the two different images, could you speak about why you married those two images together as well as the audio?
Yes. So we don't hear very much about the lionfish anymore, other than that we should eat it. But the coming of the lionfish was like, at the time, I think it was like 2014, 2015, marine scientists were calling it the largest natural disaster in history, because lionfish are not native to the Atlantic. They are thought to have been released into the ocean during Hurricane David in Florida in the early 90s, right? I think David was like 92, something like that. Nobody knew what kind of predation they were capable of, the scale of their predation. Like, they eat their way through everything and they don't have any remorse. Like, they will gouge themselves. They can eat things that are like up to 1.5 times the length of their bodies. Nobody realized how quickly they reproduce. Like, one female can reproduce something like 2 million eggs in a mating season, okay? So they quickly spread through the Atlantic. They've been spotted like as far as New England now. And they'd been eating their way through the coral reefs, and nothing in the reef knew to fear it because it's not native to the reef. So it eats everything, right? So the lionfish in the film is about the lionfish, but it's also a metaphor for capitalism and the way that capitalism presents itself in this region, and it has for time immemorial, in that settlers have come here and have eaten their way through everything. And until it's gone, they will continue to take and take and take until they move on to something else that is fresh for the taking. So it was important for me to marry the image of the lionfish because of the metaphor, but also because as a coastal community, we are reliant on what happens in our oceans, right? We don't, if the coral reef dies, then we're as good as gone. We need the reef for storm protection. We need the reef for food. We need the reef for employment, any number of things. And the way that the lionfish was affecting the reef is a lot like, this colonial experiment that had passed through here. But in any event, it was the pairing of the people and the underwater was to talk about the parity of exploitation between both our natural resources and the communities that are here. And what are the circumstances if we don't do anything about people who take. We talked a little bit about Disney coming in to start this new project before we went live. Okay, another case of somebody else, of the others, taking and taking and taking. What's going to happen if we can't move the needle on climate change, and little countries like the Bahamas don't really contribute enough to move the needle in any form or fashion? So we're just kind of like sitting ducks in what the major players are going to do, right? So I needed to talk about exploitation. I needed to talk about the very real need, the very real idea of disappearance, a physical disappearance, a cultural disappearance, which is why you see me pairing it with the underwater footage. And there's Bahamian funerary song in that film that kind of heralds, there's an alarm that rings and it heralds a disappearance of Emperor Mackenzie asks, where's his mother gone? I spent a lot of time, not all of that underwater footage is found, some of it is filmed, and I spent a lot of time on coral reefs and watching the way that these organisms in the reef react to one another. And the ecosystem is like, it's like a community, right? Like everyone's doing their part to make sure that this well-oiled machine keeps running. And if you sit there long enough and you watch the tide, it kind of turns into a parade, a dance, right? So there's, not only is it the people that are in the film, they're actually, it's filmed from a Junkanoo parade. And Junkanoo is like the biggest, one of the largest cultural identifiers of Bahamian culture that anyone could read overtly on a screen, right? And the ebb and flow of the tide then turns into a dance. And there are all these organisms that are on the reef that are dancing with it, but they're underwater. So we're talking about this very real threat of this thing. If we continue to feed it, if we continue to feed the beast, this is the fate that we're going to suffer. You know, I did a lot of rambling. I hope I hope that makes sense.
There were layers and layers and layers to that I didn't even understand with when the lionfish came that you just revealed. I also, when the lionfish came, also feels connected to me to a good sense of direction, Bridget. Partly because we know Junkanoo, right? They had Junkanoo in our family's island, Jamaica. But when is it a haka that we hear in a good sense of direction?
Yeah.
So in a good sense of direction, we hear with voices what Junkanoo always feels like to me. It feels like, Tamika, as you say, like something eventually builds up where everybody is doing their part, even if it's for revelry, right? Or well, Junkanoo and all Caribbean, I guess celebrations to me always are political and usually like, reading someone for filth just always is the case. But yeah, so and so for me, when the lionfish came feels like a good sense of direction in that, the audio builds and builds and builds, but only in this way when people are, when people can come together on the same wave, on the same vibration. And so I'm just wondering if you could speak a bit about a good sense of direction. Also, again, with why you paired it with the imagery you did, but as well, what we're hearing, what's going on, not why it matters, but just why it matters to you, what we hear.
Yeah. As you were talking, Tamika, I was thinking how it does relate to a good sense of direction, and that kind of juxtaposing the audio and the visual. And so with a good sense of direction, that was a haka that I think specifically is more like there's different types. So it's like a chant, and it's a way to remember or commemorate events. So this one was composed for the 150th commemorations of a battle that was between us and colonial forces. And it was one of the few battles during the New Zealand Wars that Māori won. And so it's kind of like, it's written as this, you have to kind of wade through lots of like military history, and they're like, oh, that was the heaviest bombardment and it was trench warfare, and it's a lot of like numbers and gun artillery information. But basically it was a battle where we knew they were coming, and so we built this fortification, and then we sent the colonial forces a letter saying, hey, come fight us, but you have to maintain these rules of engagement, which are if someone's injured and they hand over their arms, we won't, neither side will kill them, and then there'll be a time to collect your wounded afterwards. And so it was kind of like a way of, like, for us to be like, this is us standing our ground, but also you got to behave yourselves because this is our country. And so it's the commemorations for that battle. Eventually there was a battle afterwards, not that long later, and we lost that one, and then they confiscated all our land, and then we were kind of homeless in our own area. And so it's this kind of like the battle, was it the battle won but the war lost? You know, so we won that specific event, and so it commemorated that, and it was this amazing commemorations where heaps of people turned up from where I'm from. And a really cool aspect was that haka, and it has actions to it. I think it was in 2014. They like set up Facebook groups and put videos up online so we could all learn it, because some of us don't live at home, and then we could all come and participate in it. And it was an incredible privilege and powerful, I guess, affirmation of us still being here in this place that we call home. And so that was the audio, and then the visuals are Google Map screenshots, or Google Street View screenshots of Tauranga City, which is where the battle took place, and also the land that was confiscated. And so you can see it, like it's accessible to everyone because we all know what Street View looks like, and but the specific sites where it kind of veers off to turn either left or right are places that are significant to us, or places where we kind of still hold where our marae are, which are kind of like our communal complex where we can come together, and it's like these strongholds for our culture to still thrive. And so, you know, you're watching it and you can see that it's just kind of going through Tauranga City, but it also points out all the specific places in the city that are incredibly important and significant to us, with the haka over top. Yeah. And I also made that when I wasn't living at home, and so I was just a little bit homesick. So sometimes I would kind of have a look.
So we have a question from the audience that about what you both are saying right now. Thinking of Tamika's comments on Lionfish and Bridget's explanation of hakas as remembrance, I'm wondering how y'all summon or remember ancestral cartographies or ancestral relationships to land and landscapes. I'm wondering how you do this figuratively, but also literally in terms of technique and form. Bridget just sort of just addressed it now, speaking about Google Street View. This is everything I was trying to ask, but done much better. So thank you so much.
Yeah, great question. I think within a good sense of direction, I tried to pace it with the same pace as the haka. And there's different types, and there's another version called a pātere, which is basically can be either a map of an event or a map of places, and you name all the places and you name the stories to go with it. And these were often composed by women, and it was a way to state your relationship to the land, but also a way to kind of stop the gossip. And so you could say like, oh nah, that's where I'm from, or that's happened there. And you know, within communities there's this tight knit and there's lots of talk that goes on, and so there's different ways to kind of, I guess, shut people up.
Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna answer this correctly, but I think the way that I address these kind of things is a bit more of in what I expose the camera to, thinking about my audience and knowing that people will place themselves squarely in it, rather than and the elements that I'm filming, right? When I think about, and y'all please forgive me because I'm about to ramble. When I think that, like, there are more layers to when the lionfish came to, right? Like I also think about the sea. I think about how many people came to rest in that sea. And I don't know if rest is the appropriate word when the transatlantic slave trade was so violent happening. I think about filming people and putting them in this underwater frame when we quite frankly have so many people that were put in this underwater frame, and diving and spending the time there and watching the coral and spending time with coral reefs and seeing people, you know, through my imagination, seeing the people portrayed as organisms on a coral reef. In Returning the Gaze, we did something in that last sequence of images where we took women to do African spiritualist rituals into like the most colonial space we could think of on the island, and that's in Rawson Square, to kind of counter this huge marble statue of Queen Victoria, who has been sitting in the square for, you know, as long as we've known ourselves. It was erected by some organization. I can't think of who they are right now, but they're like equivalent to the Daughters of the Confederacy, right? That erected in the United States, that erected this large marble sculpture of Queen Victoria. And it was really important to me to have in our Parliament Square these women who, and in that frame, they were countering women coaling a steamship, right? So I think it's like in St. Vincent. And to have these women countering this metaphor for a colonial machine that has kind of kept going. When you think about when we think about steamships and colonial exploration and settlers, and the fact that in that frame there are women who are carrying baskets of coal to continue to fuel this machine, we now have a counter of this very, for Bahamians, a prominent space that they would look at and say, well, oh shoots, that's, you know, that's Parliament Square. And that's this large monument to colonialism. And we have these women with a nod to our African ancestral practices, Bahamians being comprised of a lot of West African cultures that were brought here during the transatlantic slave trade, was a nod to our ancestors and ancestral practice, and all the ways that we have throughout history countered this settler experience.
We have a lot of statues to Queen Victoria as well. And there's this really amazing artist a couple of years ago, and he made these video works where he put a ladder right in front of them, because they're up really high as well, like they're
yeah, what is that?
We got this giant ladder, and he climbed the ladder and he just sat there and stared at it.
Yeah.
And he did it in like many different locations. And I think there's more of a growing awareness of them, because you kind of just pass it by as well. You're like, ah.
Yes.
But I feel like soon that they'll hopefully go. But we're still part of the Commonwealth, so I'm not really sure.
We are still also a Commonwealth country, and the inscriptions on these statues say something like "Hail Queen, Hail the Imperial Queen." It's like it's in Latin, right? But it says something like "Hail the Imperial Queen," and gives you a date, 18 something or another. I can't remember what the inscription says precisely, but it's sitting in Parliament Square. Like, we've had so many changes in this country, majority rule, and we're in a predominantly Black country. And like directly opposite this mammoth sculpture of Victoria is a very small bust of one of our heroes, you know? And I don't know, it's part of the decolonial work, but in rambling, I'm saying, I guess, that it's addressed in a bit of nuance in some of these in the film. If you are Bahamian, or if you are from places that are part of the Anglophone Caribbean or other Commonwealth countries that are former colonies, some of these things would automatically the light bulb would go off.
Yeah.
There is a very tall, very high statue of Queen Victoria in Palisados in Kingston, Jamaica as well. So there is something, and I remember being there and being shocked, and you have to look up really high, but you know, the statue is like true to height of Queen Victoria. Like, the statue itself is small, and it's the only thing in that area that's like immaculately white. Like, it's clean. Everything else, it's like the market, the largest market on the island is in that area, and like all the buses, like it's a bus depot. You know, I'm curious, you know, Tamika, with what you're saying about, you know, Black people transported with the transatlantic slave trade, and, you know, in the frame of water, it makes me curious about what happened to your ancestors, Bridget, and like, or just like the connection between the two. I'm not sure if this is a question, but what happens and why we connect it to landscape and land, again, with the going back to ancestral cartographies, and if that in itself is something that we inherit as well, so that they aren't just gone, and we don't have to just access their worlds and spirits and lives through archives and documentation, but that we might have a direct connection if we're still enough, and if we listen, and if we are ready to receive and hear. Because that's another thing that I guess I knew but didn't think about explicitly between your works, is the audio for me feels prioritized, even if there's silence, right, over the image. Yeah, I had another question, I forgot it. So I'm wondering if you guys have questions for each other at all. I didn't prep you for that. I apologize, it just occurred to me. I'm just curious if you do.
Yeah, you go.
I do, actually. Yeah. Bridget, I'm curious about, forgive me, let me pull up the name of the film. The story with the girls and the quantum jumping. That's a bit different from the other works, but excites me very, very much, especially because we're thinking about works that are derived from archival histories. And I'm very much a fan of speculative. I write stories that are and make other works that are speculative documentary. And I'd like to think that particular film of yours is somewhat of a speculative documentary in the present, talking to the past, and how that relates to your other works, because it seems that it's in a different vein, but one that I fancy very much.
Yeah, thank you. You got it. It's quite different, and it was a collaboration with a friend who is a writer, Dr. Terry Teto, and she I think she's just kind of started, or the last couple of years, really getting into writing speculative fiction. That she loves sci-fi, and a part of it was that we wanted to collaborate and make a audio visual book, and we're just kind of aware, I guess, of genres and stereotypes that as Māori artists we get put into, and so, you know, everything is political, and, you know, we stand firm with that, but it's sometimes we just also want to stretch out or play across genres a bit, and so, yeah, working on her with that, it was a way for us to take very much Māori concepts of, we have this idea that of time being circular, and that you can basically kind of collapse time, and you're in the past, present and future at all times, and it's not linear. And so we wanted to relate this to, I guess, within kind of a sci-fi quantum jumping time travel, that, you know, maybe this was something that our ancestors thought of as well. Like maybe they weren't just kind of like working the land or fishing. Maybe they also had these amazing storytelling platforms and vehicles that explained the cosmos and explained different ways of thinking. And so we wanted to kind of really push that out, and I guess just make it very Māori, so the concepts that underline it, they can relate to sci-fi or these genres, but essentially they're talking about Māori concepts that underpin our way of thinking. Yeah, and we haven't really discussed making work again, but she's definitely writing more, and yeah, I don't think it would be the last, but it's, yeah, it was a not a sidestep, but just, you know, in a different direction. And it was quite fun to work with someone else and give them the audio aspect. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess at that time we just wanted to kind of give a nod to people that we found fascinating and really informed, kind of fun ways of thinking and understanding the world. Yeah. That sounds really amazing that you're into speculative documentary, though. I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to wait a whole week before asking you about that, because we've been emailing you a lot, you both a lot lately.
Yeah. Yeah, Tamika, I kind of had a question around, I guess, the sea, and for us as well. It was, you know, my ancestors voyaged via the stars and the natural elements, all of the Pacific, and this has been something that we've kind of been revitalizing for the last couple of decades. But the story that, I guess the colonial story that was told to us even growing up was that, you know, like there's this painting of Māori and it's a remake of the Raft of Medusa. And so it was as if we just kind of got on a boat and then somehow landed here, and we were all kind of like just got taken away by a storm. So this revitalization of knowledge and I guess the science of navigation is really kind of growing and becoming ever stronger now. And so the sea being, in a way we connect to the other islands in the Pacific. So as a provider and kind of that readjusting what we've historically been told is us arriving here in Aotearoa. So we have this kind of relationship with the sea that's incredibly important, being, you know, island nations. And you kind of touched on it a bit, but I'd like to, I guess, hear more about your relationship with the ocean.
Yeah. So I think one of the biggest complexities of living in a coastal community is that not a lot of people here know how to swim. And I think about that a lot. And I think about, I have to back it up to our experiences, our traumatic experiences with the Atlantic slave trade, because there's still lots of people who won't acknowledge that slavery was a very real happening, that won't acknowledge a tie to an African ancestral lineage that kind of brought us here. And I think because we are a former colony and because we are still a Commonwealth country, you know, our school curriculums don't serve us in helping us to wade through that complexity. We study the Lucayans, we study English history, but we don't really wade through, you know, what it is to be here. What's the difference between enslaved peoples arriving? What's the difference between liberated Africans? Who all came to settle in this coastal, and settle is a very easy word. Settle is a word that takes away the trauma. It kind of romanticizes what happened, right? So I don't really like to use the word settle, but for all intents and purposes, we came to settle in coastal communities. And for family islanders throughout the archipelago, people who live on islands that are not where we are, where the capital is housed, a lot of those people they don't live inland, they live right on the coast, right? Even in a place where for centuries we've been plagued by hurricanes that are getting worse and worse. I think about all those things in our relationship to the ocean and how we reconcile them with the great respect that we have for the ocean. We too navigate by the stars. When I visit the family islands and people are fishing at night, all the men tell me, oh yeah, I'm going out, you know, tonight. And I ask, well, how the hell do you know where you're going? And they tell me, you know, I've been fishing these waters since I was a child. I know how to navigate by the constellations. That's not something that's new to me. And having lived and having been raised in the capital, that's a very different lived experience for me. But I still have a lot of respect for the ocean. I'm a scuba diver. And I think it's very important for me in telling stories about this place, in making speculative documentary stories about this space, to have a relationship of reverence and respect, but also a healthy amount of fear, because we don't know, and we'll never know what all is in that expanse, you know. And it feeds us, and it protects us, and it nurtures us. And when we think back to, in terms of spirituality, it cleanses us, and it is a portal to other worlds. When we think about quantum jumping, you know, we wouldn't be who we are without the ocean. I couldn't imagine being from somewhere else.
Yeah, a Martinican person once told me that growing up near the sea makes you live life differently. And if I recall correctly, his word wasn't you see life differently, it was you live life differently. And I remember thinking, oh, that's obvious, right? You know, growing up near a beach, you know, that would do. And you're helping me now understand that was probably, well, it was definitely a lot more than that. We have another audience question. Thinking of Tamika's comments on Lionfish and, oh, no, that was the same one. This is, that was my mistake, I apologize. Okay, so this is for me. Jaqui, I'm curious about your experience coming to Tamika and Bridget's work. The program notes say they sever the connection between image and dialogue, facilitating the transfer of your energy away from your screen to your senses and the vibrations of land, place, and connections. Which images and sounds resonated with you most when first watching Tamika's and Bridget's work along those lines? Well, I tried to make I tried to make this clear in my introduction to the screeners. I really like works that feel still and feel like they give you space. That's very important to me. And I also, again, when thinking about how often we look at screens, was looking for, thinking of any works that would get me to sort of deprioritize what was on screen and see if I could actually be a part of it. So I knew storytelling would be key for me. And so when I saw 1,000 Points of Light, and then when I saw Otakuro, I knew that I would ask Tamika and Bridget to be part of this program. And so initially I thought I would have to choose one person, and I didn't know how I was gonna do that. And then so it was Otakuro for Bridget and 1,000 Points of Light for Tamika. And then when I was able to see more of both of their works, the fact that I could piece together shorter, even still very impactful pieces in between or link the films together to give you some sort of, and myself, not a palette cleanse, but you're able to move from one piece and to me feel fully into the next piece. Was very important, as well as the fact that it feels to me like neither Bridget or Tamika are making things easy for you. And not to say that they're making it, the works are difficult, but you will have to find your own way in them. And storytelling is very important to me just generally, because, you know, for me, this is where my family comes in. So when I was thinking about the program, I asked my sister Janelle, who did the introduction. I had a lot of different places I wanted to look, and I asked for her help directing me. And in directing me, that's where I found more of both of their works. And that is not, for me, coincidental, because our mother is a librarian and she grew up reading to us, but she raised us on her own. So every night, you know, she'd, you know, come after a long day of work, get us into our pajamas, make us some Milo. But oftentimes by the time she sat down to read, she was falling asleep because she had a long day of work. So it was Janelle's job to continue reading for me, because at some point she could read and I couldn't. And then just eventually, I think it just became her older sister duties. So for me, coming to storytelling and to work through a family way or through my support system, and then having works that are very clear about not distracting you and that are very purposeful are very important. And then again, there's also a poise about both of their works that are very obvious for me in the actual images that I'm looking at when I do look at the images more than listen. And so for me, when the Lionfish came, it's just absolutely stunning and beautiful, if even difficult to watch, which I think it should be. a good sense of direction to me is stunning to listen to. The Camera Obscura series to me is just refreshing, but also necessary, and still very, very beautiful. And for me, 28 is very, very hard to watch. It's just, again, stunning, but also very difficult to watch. And there's a clear story there. So it's a matter of things that feel so big and so expansive. And the works I feel you have to more feel than engage with verbally. Let me not say have to. I would say, I'm struggling for words because they feel that big to me. But it's that, that there's more about it when you feel it than when you start thinking, oh, this is what's happening. And I don't mean that in an ethnographic way or a, you know, in a colonial way. I just mean that there is a sense and there is an intelligence about not going brain forward, eyesight forward, you know, into works. I think all of the works are beautiful. So. I should probably actually write down an answer to that and use that as a writing prompt. Yeah, so we have I think we have time. Not I think we have time for one more question. I'm wondering if either of you has any more questions.
I was just going to say before, when you were talking about learning history in school, I think we must have had the same maybe English curriculum, because we also learned about like Ireland and Rasputin, and nothing about our own histories. And I think they're going to start teaching it next year for the first time, like kind of compulsory.
Okay.
But yeah, that
in 2022, that's
yeah.
the first.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah, that you can take like electives in high school, but yeah, there's not a lot being taught about ourselves, and so that, yeah.
I don't know if the complication is us not necessarily being an indigenous people to this land, but it's still a story that's not in any way, shape, or form other than from the perspective of the plantocracy that's going to be taught in our schools, you know. And I don't take that lightly, and I think I try to make sure that it shows up in my work, and finding ways to channel that into the broader community, so that we think critically about what is this alternate. It's not an alternate history, it is our history. It's just that it's not taught, you know. It's really complex, but I am happy to hear that in other countries that have been affected by this colonial project, that change is happening.
Yeah, slowly. Yeah, but even it was beautiful to hear that, you know, people that go fishing at night also navigate by the stars. And then as you were saying it, I was like, oh yeah, of course, like that makes total sense. And then you're like, there's probably many different cultures all around the world that do that. It was just that, you know, these European nations decided to think of this other way, and that's what we know is the way to sail. You're like, well, no.
I find, and I often, I joke about it a lot, and I call Family Island people moon people because they do so many things by the moon. And I
Mm.
didn't realize that until I started spending time there for research, and midwifery by the moon,
Mm.
fishing by the moon,
Yeah.
you know, planting, farming by the
Yeah.
moon,
Yeah.
and living in the capital. If you're not exposed to, have grown up in families that participate in any of those things, you won't know that.
Mm. Yeah.
Antidotes about why the fish aren't biting at the full moon, you know. And I was like, what, where did this come from, and why are we not writing this down?
Yes. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, the moon people.
Yeah.
But we're gonna have to
Our
continue
calendar.
this conversation outside of
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
conversation. Yeah.
Our calendar is named after the moon because that's how we govern time. And so Marama is moon. And so the calendar is called Marama Taka. So we don't use the sun or, this Gregorian calendar. It's the moon. That's
Yeah.
how we do everything. And yeah, I imagine.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that actually brings me to the last I'll close out with the final question. I've been thinking, I just saw a talk given by Zakia Iman Jackson, I believe is her name. So she is a scholar at the University of Southern California, I believe a comparative literature scholar. And she gave a talk about Sylvia Wynter and her philosophy of aesthetics. And in the talk, she describes that Wynter and she herself, I hope I have her pronouns correct, uh, they're interested in what art does, not what it means. And I'm curious to hear you both close out with, if we come back to this circular, holistic approach of storytelling, of conveying, of thinking. I'm curious what it does for us, particularly the dispossessed, and not, in conversation with art and the status quo and things like that, but what it means for you and why engaging in and why there is a root of it at your art, or in your art.
I recently had to withdraw an essay that I'd committed to an anthology of works for a long time. I think it was something like 2 years. So we kind of drug it out, and COVID contributed to that. But in the editing, it came back that I could tell that these very Western folks were trying to skew the story for it to be something else that I didn't want it to be. I needed it to be, I needed to be able to access dialect. I needed to be able to use dialect as a tool. I needed to be able to tell a story about ancestral knowing without translating it as a possession. I needed to have agency to use nuance that would be familiar throughout this region, if that makes sense. Because I think if this conversation really is circular, if we go back to the very beginning, I think both Bridget and I are working to give our respective communities agency, a break from the formality and the history of ethnographic and anthropologic studies in our respective spaces. And it is of paramount importance that, and if I misstep, I am open to critique if I am in any way mirroring any of those practices, because that is not the goal. The goal is for agency, for the way that we identify ourselves, not this idea that the rest of the world has about us, but that we from the inside know and feel about ourselves.
Yeah, I totally agree. The importance of writing our own histories and creating our own archives, whatever that creation aspect means. And yeah, those words of agency and nuance, giving us the freedom to break free from those ethnographic constraints and play a little or dream a little or have some fun and creating something that we can, it identifies us now and then also gives possibility for how future generations will identify themselves, and leaving that open and leaving our making sure our cultures are growing and thriving.
Well, thank you to both of you so much. This was a very unexpected conversation in the best way. So I would like to close out by just reading a brief quote from Otakaro. It comes from the beginning that feels very fitting to me. So again, written by Dr. Terry Tahau, and of course, at the beginning of Bridget's work, Otakaro. The past can be described as the days in front, and Maori people are known, as it were, to move in the future while facing the past. There are some Maori that will face neither the past nor the future and will step completely off the track. So I hope we can both face the past, face the future, find the possibilities in stepping off the track. And I hope this conversation helped anyone listening in that way.